Hi, my name is Nigel Lewis. I'm Head of Content at LandlordZONE, and we are here today to talk about EPCs. We have some expertise in the room with me, which is, of course, Eddie. I can't remember your name. Hooker. Keep that in. I forgot my boss's own name, which is always a good start. And also we have Damian Thompson, who, to use your informal title, would be like Head of Landlord Mortgages at the Nationwide.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, that's good.
Welcome to the podcast. At least I remembered your name, so we're good.
Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you here. Thank you for coming up to Boreham Wood. We appreciate that. So I think the first question is always going to be, where are we with EPCs right now? What's your view of where the process has got to?
So I think it's a really interesting place to start. So maybe for your viewers, it'd be interesting just to describe what they are. So an EPC measures a property's energy efficiency, rating it from A, most efficient, to G, less efficient, whilst the minimum energy efficiency standards set a legal minimum EPC rating required for rental properties. So I think important to kind of start there.
Yeah.
Because I think that context is really interesting. We've got EPCs, but we've also got this thing called MEES, which the government is consulting on. And therefore, the focus of the UK government is to try to get all rental properties to a C. So if you're a landlord today with a property rating of C or a property rating of B, likely you're going to be okay within the new limit. But if you're a D or an E, you're going to have to raise your standards to be able to get a C.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always been interesting in that some people say percentage of the market is F, which means they are being rented illegally.
Well, I think the main question
can't be rented.
Absolutely, the main question. Obviously, most people know when an EPC is taken. So when you buy the property, you get an EPC. How often do you need to update your EPC?
Every 10 years.
So there could be properties that actually now do fit the standard.
And in particular, if you've got a mortgage property, it is likely if you want to remortgage, you're going to have to check you've got an EPC rating. So if you're in the mortgage cycle, it's likely if you move or remortgage, you're going to have to get an EPC.
Yes.
The challenge is for people who aren't, who don't have a mortgage on the property. So actually, there's no interaction with finance that drives them to get the upgraded. You'd be hopeful if they're letting through letting agents, that the letting agents is keeping them aware of that. But maybe if they're not, that's the area where some people may not recognise that they need to have the EPC rating.
So around about 20% of landlords have a mortgage. Yeah. So there's quite a large percentage that won't have a lender driving the EPC update.
Yes.
And around about 51% of landlords don't use a letting agent, so they're self-managing. Yeah. So there's actually quite a large cohort, which is quite an interesting stat, that actually won't be in a position or won't have thought or won't be reminded to update their EPC.
And for the moment, we'll have to do it themselves.
Yes.
100%. And I think that's a really good stat.
And I think it's really important. It's one of the reasons that we want to come and do these podcasts is because I think it's important for people to recognize their responsibilities. And any message we can get out to good landlords to say, this is coming, you need to be on dealing with it, I think is really important.
Because just before we forget, there is only 3 years. And I know these are all proposals at the moment, and the consultations finish in England. Wales is about to finish soon in Scotland, but we are still in a place where it's 3 years. That's not long.
And I think the challenge that we are calling out, particularly to the government, is people need certainty. So one of the reasons landlords don't act is they're not certain. What are the proposal under MEES? What's the new EPC? Are going to actually mean that I physically have to do. And until people get that certainty, they can't act. And therefore, for us, one of the really important things is that we align on dates. So if you take, for example, to get to the deadline that you talked about, we would need to be currently doing 2,000 houses a day.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Actually getting that finished. So the 2-year deadline is very strict. Now in Scotland, they've come up and said 2033.
Yeah.
And therefore, we hope that as the proposals come through, the government will think of that. But even with that, alongside building 1.5 million homes, doing social housing, this is still a massive challenge to have enough people to be able to do this work. So until landlords get certainty, what is it I'm supposed to do, then they need to think about how am I going to do it, how am I going to finance it. Those are going to be challenges.
Making an assumption for the moment, because unfortunately we don't know the actual date, but making an assumption that we're looking at a 2028 to 2030 deadline,
Yes.
I'm just going to jump right to the end of the process.
Yeah.
What happens to that landlord if their property, as at the date of these new regulations, is not up?
Well, assuming there are any councils left to enforce the rules,
making that assumption.
Because they won't be able to rent out their property or get a mortgage.
Yeah, to get people to think about this is what is the repercussions if you don't do it.
The repercussions, as Nigel said, is that legally you're not entitled to rent that property out. And therefore, councils will have the authority to act on that. Landlords could face fines, other pieces for not breaking the regulations. And I think,
or can't rent the property at all.
Absolutely not. And the value therefore
difference. That's a very important point for the listeners.
I was just curious, and this, you may not know this, but I'll ask you, which is I don't know, perhaps your internal data or industry data you maybe see that people watching this don't, is what percentage or how difficult is it for people from getting from D to C? My personal opinion is, or feeling is, it's quite easy to get from D to C, but getting from E to C is usually a much more expensive stretch.
And I think it's one of the interesting things about, we have a very unique building situation within the UK. We've got older homes, we've got listed homes, we've got homes that have been built pre-war, post-war. So therefore, getting from D to C should usually be simple. But once again, if you go back to what is the new measurement going to actually mean you have to do, that could be the challenge. So, one of the things that we're particularly concerned about would be, depending on what work the landlord needs to do, can the tenant stay in situ? Or is some of the work so challenging that the tenant will have to leave?
Internal insulation.
Insulation, stuff that they need to do. And then you get to a point where the tenant then leaves, and therefore we've come to this point, everybody's trying to get it done. Tenants are being exited. There's not enough social housing built. Therefore, the reason we kind of want that timeline to think about stretching out is you need to have the resources, you need to have the clarity, you need to be certain that landlords can choose how they'll be able to do that work. And most importantly, we want tenants to be in a position that they've got some certainty about what it means for them. If we get everybody doing the work at the same time and having people to leave their properties, that could be a big challenge for councils and local authorities.
I think the National Residential Landlords stated that their research suggested that the average landlord where the EPC was an E or F, it would be around about £20,000 to £25,000 worth of additional investment to bring it up to a C. So I do like your comment, Damian, on the D to a C. That's probably an easier jump. But there's a lot of Victorian properties in the UK where, just by the nature of their build, they're going to be in the E or F category. And I think that's an important thing to note, that there will be cost involved. And we'll talk a little bit later on about where we can get some support. From a lender point of view, Damian, when you are lending money, and the EP, let's say the law goes through, say 2030, and you are looking to lend, you will look at that EPC certificate, and if it is a C, below a C, will that mean you won't lend?
I think it'll be, if you think about where we need to get to, if we get to a stage where, let's say it's a year past, so it's very clear this is where you need to get to. I don't think lenders will lend if it's beyond that. I think the opportunity and the things that we currently think about is we've got, for example, a green further advance where people could come and borrow the additional money to do the work.
Yeah.
But the challenge is, well, what am I doing? So if I go and invest, am I clear that the work I'm going to do is going to get me there? So I think lenders will support with the finance available to help landlords to get to where they need to get to once they've got clarity.
Yeah.
But I think we also are concerned that some of the caps are very blunt. So, you know, depending on the value of the property, to spend up to 15,000 is a larger percentage for someone with a £70,000 mortgage on a property, and therefore mostly got the most vulnerable of people in society and those. And therefore, if you're putting them to that cap and they can't afford to do it, then are you doing the right thing? So we're very keen to see maybe linking the cap to the council tax banding so that you get more appropriate levels. And we think 15,000 is just too big a cap, depending on the size of the property. So to your point, I think we will step back, we will support, we'll do everything we can do to help them to be able to get to where they need to. But that certainty is the biggest driver. And then I think people can plan.
And just to be clear for our viewers, the cap means that that's the maximum that the government has set that a landlord will spend, after which they get exemptions.
Right? Exemptions.
But that is how much you are going to spend if that's what's needed on it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So therefore, you know, if you've got, and I think one of the challenges we think, for example, is if you've got a portfolio of properties, you've got different levels of income and rent, your ability to think about how you might finance that is, you know, through a number of different means. If you've got one or two properties, we think that's where landlords at that level of cap will kind of go, this is a bit too much of a challenge for me.
And of course, jumping again to an assumption, I've just talked about new lending. What about renewal lending, so remortgaging? So if I've got a mortgage with you, Damian, and actually I come to remortgage,
and you don't have the right level of EPC.
and I suddenly, and I'm thinking, well, I can't get finance for this now, and I certainly don't have the cash in my...
Well, you go into the variable rate, which might be...
Yes, how has anyone thought about that currently?
I think lenders are thinking about it, and therefore I think the thing that we're really trying to do is to represent to the government through all of our interactions that this is a nuanced issue and will require nuanced solutions. Rather than a one-size-fits-all. And therefore, that level of conversation we're trying to engage is to kind of line up on the time scales, give landlords enough time, think about the supply chain and capability to get the work done in terms of the right levels of skills. Are we investing in the people that are going to be the future retrofitters of tomorrow to get this work done? And then we're thinking about how do you think about lower value properties that are challenging? And I think one of the things we think about too as well is maybe should we start at getting some properties to see rather than trying to get them all to see. So think about how you might support them being able to do that, because what we'd like to see out of this is more properties to see. Right? I mean, we all agreed on getting that energy efficiency standard for people to live in a decent home is something that we fully support. We'd all like to see people get there, but we want to make sure we don't have unintended consequences by not thinking through the solutions.
So just to quickly summarise where we are with the finance side of it. So I think there's 4, maybe 5 schemes available, which are a mixture of loans and grants you can get. I think the most prevalent is the warm homes. Local grant. So you can go to your local council or directly, I think, for that money. You may not get it, but you can at least apply for it. But the interesting thing is that at the moment, lenders, including yourself, if I'm right, say you can have this green loan, but your EPC has to be a C, then you get a lower interest rate. But you will also lend them a standard amount of money, on standard rate, without the EPC.
Yes. Yeah. So I think the conversation that we kind of get to is there's a number of things that are on offer. So there's a warm homes grant, there's a boiler upgrade scheme, there's green loans on offer, and there are eco grants, Great British Insulation Scheme, etc. So there are a number of different schemes available to landlords. I think one of the most important things for landlords are find your letting agents, find a really strong source of information that can guide you and help you. Look on our websites, look on your lender's website, and see the information that's available to you. And I think things like these podcasts really helping people to get interested in what's going on and then going to find solutions is the right thing.
It's start now.
Yeah,
because even if it is 2033, you know, I mean, we remember what we were doing in 2020, and that was 5 years
I know.
Yeah.
So 5 years is not a long time to start thinking about this.
Yeah.
I was going to say maybe a parting shot here is you have connections with government. I assume being
100%.
as you were saying, like the
Yes.
number 2 lender in the UK, and a sizable one, nevertheless, in terms of how much your book is, as they say in the industry. But does that give you leverage in government circles to understand where they're going? Can you give a snippet on where the sort of policy thrust is?
So I think the policy thrust is quite common. I won't have anything to add to the thrust.
Sure,
I think what we would say is we are constantly making representations to anybody within the government, particularly around the energy schemes, to say we believe there's some nuanced things that you need to think about, some things that we've just described. We're happy to come on board and help you to think about how you'll be able to do it. But also we're saying to this point, we want to get out and help to educate more landlords, particularly around the things they need to do. So content on our websites, we're doing surveys with customers so we understand what the things that they're thinking about. But as much influence as we can place through government and through other companies trying to bring the industry together to kind of represent these things directly.
Because you don't want to be a landlord and in late 2027 be suddenly waking up and going, oh my lord, I've got to get my mortgage sorted, I've got to get an EPC sorted, I've got to get a grant sorted, and it's even if they're given an extra year by the lenders, it's still, that's 18 months to do quite a lot,
Quite a lot of work, and I think the main thing for us is being very clear what the standard is. So landlords will not act until they know this is what I'm acting to. So therefore, to your point, they've got to start thinking about it. We've got to get clarity on what the standards are, and then they've got to act.
Do you think it's good advice, Damian, to suggest to landlords to re-evaluate their energy rating now, so that they know what to do?
I think everybody should know the current circumstances that they're in. I 100% think that they should do. And I think the letting agents will help with that as you come into new tenancies, etc. If you haven't got a letting agency, you need to do some thinking about, in the long term, is this the right thing for me to be able to do? How do I get that support?
Yeah, even with the letting agency market, I mean, they're generally, for many letting agents, not all, they will drive the you need to have an EPC rating as it's coming up a year before, say, the actual expiry date. But if you've bought a property 3 years ago, and you had it was an F, but you've been doing a little bit of work on it as the void periods come up, no one's going to really remind you until 2030, 2031. I mean,
or you try and remortgage and you can't get a mortgage.
I don't want to make the EPC market rich necessarily, but is it worth landlords now saying, well, actually, I don't really know where it was an F or it was an E, but I have been playing around with the insulation and there was a new boiler. Is it worth people reassessing now?
I think people reassessing now is always useful.
Yeah.
I guess the conversation, though, is back to that point. If there are going to be new standards,
what are those standards?
then what are those standards? So evaluating now and going, okay, I'm all right. There's nothing else I need to do when there are new standards to come out. It's someplace that we don't really want landlords to be because they may get a false belief that, okay, I'm all right, and then
it doesn't make a C.
It doesn't make a C. So that's why we're really pushing, clarify very quickly for people what it is, what's that going to look like, so they can make informed decisions. It's a very tough choice, but I think people need to know what they're working to.
Because I think there's going to be an impact on insurance as well here, because if you've got a property insured and it does not meet the standards, when the law comes in, when the rules come in, and a claim happens, there is a chance an insurance company could turn around and say, well, you're in breach of the regulation, and therefore we are not paying out that flood, that fire,
Or even rent guarantee.
or even rent guarantee insurance. So the implications, Damien, as you're saying, are quite wide.
And I think that's why we're, back to that point. Clarity allows everybody to get around, and for landlords to understand what it is they need to do and get to some of the stuff that they really want to. Local councils can be clear about what they got to do it in their areas. How can they support landlords in doing that stuff? How can they put communication out to landlords? We've got the stuff, the NLRA, all the different organizations can start to flood the market with something that people genuinely can understand is the right way to go.
So coming towards the end, let's focus. Where can landlords currently find information about how they can start to think about this?
So I think there's stuff on the government's websites. There are stuff in the lenders' website. So we've got a really page where we share lots of information. And one of the things we say to landlords, we do lots of surveys of our landlords to say, what is it you would like to know? So our content's driven by them telling us what they need to do. We do lots of research.
So type in decent home standards.
Decent home standards, then you get to see the
Google,
information that you want to get to. You see some of the things that you can naturally do. If you're replacing a bulb in your property, do you put an energy efficient one in? There are little things that you can start to think about as you get on to do that work. As you start thinking to yourself, well, there's some stuff that I want to do here with a new tenancy and that kind of stuff. So as you start to get to some of these break points where you've got opportunities, I think try to get as much information as possible.
And of course the tenants getting educated as well.
Well, they can apply for grants.
Yeah.
So
That's right. So they can apply for grants as well.
And I think the ultimate thing that we always try to get across, and it's something that I am very passionate about, is we talk about rentals, but in reality, this is their home. So the person renting doesn't see it as a rent. This is someplace that I put my head and home. And therefore, for them, clarity means that landlords get certainty, and they can then think about, well, here's the things that I might need to do in the long term. Here's the landlord's going to do some work, but I understand why they're doing this work, because it's going to save me on my bills. It's going to help with the efficiency of the home. It's going to help with the way I live my life, and therefore I want to get this done. So part of the education is also going to be for tenants around, your landlord's going to need to do some work. So how can you help that landlord to do that work, and how can you and the landlord engage in something that I think landlords do good landlords do naturally anyway? It's a relationship with the tenant, just like we try to recognize it's a relationship with our landlords. So one of the things that we're thinking about now is, okay, landlords are coming under more information, more things they need to do. So how do we simplify finance? How do we make, if you're dealing with us, your life as simple as possible? Because we know you've got bigger things to think about with all this stuff that's going on. So I think lenders, the whole industry, letting agencies, if we get that certainty, we can just all corral around and help people to get a really clear path, really clear direction. Here's what you need to do. And if you get to the end of this road, you're going to be okay.
So I'm overthinking this, Nigel. Even from a letting agency point of view, especially with overseas landlords, the responsibility to ensure compliance is adhered.
Well, we've been talking about landlords today a lot, but the percentage reality, as in, I think you were saying earlier, sort of 30-40% of all people who will be doing this upgrade work are letting agents. So we're all a landlord community here. But it is the letting agents who will probably be quite linchpin in this.
Yeah, they will be
as much as the landlords.
And I think that they'll be well geared up once they understand what that looks like, because they can see the range of tenancies, they can see the stuff on their book to help and support landlords in being able to do it. I guess from our situation, the worst thing we would want to see is landlords exiting when they could have got enough information through a system to be able to make really informed decisions. And the reason we really care about that is because at the end of the day, we want the tenant to be able to have someplace comfortable, warm, and decent to live. So I think through all of this, the bit we're trying to say to the government and we're trying to liaise with them on is, please recognize this is a nuanced challenge. There's lots of people in this chain that we need to work through. But actually, if we all come together and give clarity, the lenders can really get behind making sure that the thing that we all want is energy efficiency in homes in the UK, and particularly for people in tenancies, to be strong.
And finally, when do you think we will get that clarity? So is this coming through? Will this be announced at the same time?
Any moment for the English one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for the English one we'll get some details. I think the challenge is we'll get the dates and stuff, but the EPC, what is an EPC, is until 2026.
Wow, so we've still got
the MEES
technical stuff. So anything that can bring forward that implementation, anything that can bring certainty to that and bring those dates closer together,
absolutely,
to give people the maximum amount of time. I think the thing that we always get back to is, in order to get to the deadline now, we need to be doing 2,000 houses a day completed. So if you think about, as you push that forward 12 to 18 months,
6,000 a day.
Yeah, and therefore, that bit of certainty for landlords, lack of worry for tenants, and clarity for the market on what they need to do is the most important thing that we think.
I think on that note, I will say thank you, Eddie.
Thank you.
Hooker. I will also say thank you, Damian Thompson of Nationwide. And I say thank you to you for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.